All right, looks like we're recording.
Yep, ready to start. Thanks, everybody.
So, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Review Board for the National Register of Historic Places. My name is Kristen Anderson. I'm currently chair of the review board. The board's purpose this evening is to consider the nomination of properties to the National Register of Historic Places. As most of you know, the National Register is a federal list of those places deemed worthy of preservation. A nomination form has been completed for each of the properties that will be considered tonight. Each nomination form has been sent to the review board members, and each member has had an opportunity to study it prior to the meeting. The owners of nominated properties, local officials, and interested local groups have been notified of this meeting. All have been invited to send written comments about the nomination and to attend the meeting. Some of you may wish to speak this evening about a particular property. You are welcome to do so, and I encourage you to address yourself to the question of whether that property meets the criteria of significance for the National Register. These criteria are the standards against which the review board will evaluate the nominations. This evaluation is the board's only assignment. These criteria have been established by federal regulation. Copies of the criteria have been sent to owners of nominated properties and to the other parties I mentioned earlier. A description of the National Register program has also been sent to them. Each of the nominations will be presented by a staff member. Persons viewing the meeting remotely will then be given an opportunity to comment. These comments should be limited to 3 minutes. The State Historic Preservation Review Board will then discuss the nomination and a vote by the board will follow. Should a nomination be determined this evening to meet the criteria for inclusion in the National Register, the nomination will be forwarded to the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer, Amy Spong. Should she agree that the property meets the criteria and that the nomination is in proper form, she will sign the nomination and forward it to the National Register office in Washington, D.C., where it will be reviewed once more. The process is a lengthy one, but it is calculated to subject each property to rigorous evaluation. Before we begin, I would like the members of the State Historic Preservation Review Board to introduce themselves, briefly stating the role they fill on the review board and their particular expertise. So, alphabetically, as always, I'm Kristen Anderson. I'm one of the architectural historians, and I teach art history and architectural history at Augsburg University. And is board member Brunfeld here yet? Or have we heard if she's coming? Anybody know? Okay, we'll go on. Board member Decker.
I'm here. Can
you introduce yourself, John?
John Decker. I'm a member at large.
Thank you. Board member Dyer.
Hi, Lindsay Dyer, member at large.
Thank you. Board member James.
I am Elliot James.
Thank you.
I'm one of the historians on the board, and I teach history at the University of Minnesota Morris.
Great. Board member Koski.
I'm Philip Koski. I serve in the role of a historical architect on the board, and I'm a practicing architect in real life in downtown Minneapolis.
Thank you. Board member Lavasser.
I'm Andrea Lavasser, and I am the prehistoric archaeologist, and I am retired from the National, where I was the heritage program manager there.
Thank you. Board member Olson.
Hi, my name's Steve Olson. I am a member at large and a practicing civil engineer.
Thank you. Board member Schulke.
Hi, I'm Chris Schulke. I'm the executive director of the Otter Tail County Historical Society. I'm in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. I'm a public historian and a member at large.
Thank you. Board member Stark. Board member Stark, are you there?
Yes. Oh, I hit mute twice. I am John Stark. I'm a historic architect, practicing as an architect in Minneapolis, doing a lot of preservation stuff.
Thank you. Board member Warner.
I'm Mary Warner, member at large. I'm executive director at the Morrison County Historical Society and a public historian.
Thank you. And board member White.
I'm Frank White, and I'm one of the board members at large.
Thank you. And circling back around, Board Member Brunfeld, are you here? Okay. Next is the Deputy State Director, Amy Spong, for updates. Amy?
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Good evening, everyone. Just a couple of announcements. I'd like to just briefly introduce the State Historic Preservation Office staff that we have presenting at the meeting tonight and helping format, who is our grants and communications manager. He's doing everything WebEx, and you might notice the slide. There is a phone number to contact him if you are having any issues with the virtual meeting format. We also have most of our National Register team here, Michelle Decker, and we have Ginny Way and Dennis Gardner. And then we also have, I think I'm seeing maybe a surprise visit from one of our environmental review team members, Leslie Colborn. So welcome, everyone. And myself, I'm Amy Spong, the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer. And I don't think I see our National Register archaeologist, David Mather, on here, but that's the whole. Oh, wonderful, David. I didn't see your name. I apologize. So we have our whole National Register team here this evening for the meeting. And just a couple more announcements. Something just to verify that's also up on the slide that you see right now. This is a public meeting that's being held virtually. We're able to do this during our health pandemic under Minnesota Statute 13D.021. And we just need to make sure that we are doing roll calls during our votes that are being taken. We also need to make sure that everyone is being heard. We've used this WebEx format in the past, but I would just encourage all the board members familiar with where your mute button is, your video, to stop and start your video at the bottom of the screen, and maybe most importantly is how to raise your hand. If you do want to speak, is the small smiley face with the little plus sign. It's not always intuitive, but you click on that, and then you can see at the top is raise hand. And so several of us SHPO staff will be paying attention and watching that, and we'll help the chair, Chair Anderson, and the board members know when if there's people that are wanting to speak. But for the most part, the chair will call on you. And also, I would just encourage all the board members to have your cameras on if you have them available during discussion. You can turn them off during the presentation by staff, but I would just encourage everyone to have cameras. The public and your colleagues can kind of see each other and help us feel maybe we're a little more in person. Finally, my last announcement, I just want to say that the SHPO team, the planning team, has submitted our final draft statewide Minnesota Comprehensive Preservation Plan to the National Park Service. And we did this back in early October. The Park Service has a 45-day review period. And so we are expecting to hear back from the Park Service with any comments for things that we might need to update or edit any day now. So it's very exciting. It was a really big lift, but I especially want to thank this board for your participation in helping, the SHPO team, the planning team, with the identifying goals and objectives, and just the many conversations we had throughout the 2-year period. It was a 2-year engagement period, and we've, both as a planning team and as a whole SHPO team, we've done some reflection on the process already in conversations. And one of the things that I heard in both of those meetings was one of the successful things were the interviews that were conducted by the state review board members, the individual interviews that were done, and the feedback that was given by this board. So We hope that we're going to be more proactive starting in January with planning annual work plans that relate to our statewide preservation plan. And we're also, I anticipate, thinking more about how we might be able to engage this board in more of those annual work planning sessions. So we're thinking about that. If anyone has thoughts or are interested in, maybe being a little more engaged in how do we achieve our preservation goals. It's not just a SHPO preservation plan, it is a statewide preservation plan. So we would love your assistance too in just helping to get the word out there once we do announce that the plan is in its final approved state. So thanks again, everyone, for your participation. It was a big lift for our office. We probably will be doing things a little differently next time. We couldn't anticipate a lot of the things that came up during it, but we're really pleased to have this ready to help guide preservation and for the next 10 years. And that is all. I'll hand it over to Chair Anderson.
Thank you very much. And we'll do our attendance roll call now. And Kristen Anderson is present. Board Member Brunfeld. Board Member Decker.
Here.
Board Member Dyer.
Here.
Board Member James.
Here.
Board Member Koski.
Present.
Board Member Lavasser.
I'm here.
Board Member Mann. Okay, is absent today. Board Member Olson.
Present.
Board Member Schulke.
Here.
Board Member Solomonson, also absent today, I believe. Okay, Board Member Stark.
Here.
Board Member Warner.
Here.
Board Member White.
Here.
Thanks, everybody, for that. And now we turn to the approval of the minutes from August 17th. Anyone have any comments or observations before we go ahead to approve them?
Board Member Schulke, make a motion to approve the minutes of August 17th.
Thank you, Board Member Schulke. Is there a second?
Board Member Warner, I will second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, and we vote. Board Member Anderson, yes. Board Member Decker? Vote to approve? He's on mute, maybe. Board Member Decker? Do you vote to approve?
Aye.
Thank you. Board Member Dyer?
Aye.
Board Member James?
Aye.
Board Member Koski?
Aye.
Board Member Lavasser? Lavasser? To approve? Okay, we'll just.
Aye.
Thank you. Board Member Olson?
Need to abstain. I wasn't present.
Okay. Board Member Schulke?
Aye.
Board Member Stark?
Aye.
Board Member Warner?
Aye.
Board Member White?
Aye.
Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll turn to our nominations, starting with the Northern Pacific Depot, Fergus Falls, Otter Tail County, and Dennis Gardner presenting for us.
Yes, Chair Anderson, let me just pull the PowerPoint up real quick here.
Should I say that all again, Mr. Gardner? You've got time to get ready.
No, I just need to pull it up here. So, can everybody see this?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay, good. Just want to make sure we can see it.
No, we can't say it.
We can't.
Dennis.
Oh, you can't?
Uh,
Okay, let's see here. Okay, hang on just a second here.
Take a motion to adjourn.
Oh, boy.
We'll give this another few minutes. I bet Emily and Ralph worked hard on this nomination.
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
We're getting
Beautiful.
there. There we go.
You just
Okay.
There you go. You got it.
Do we have the full screen?
Yes.
Oh, good. Good. Okay. Okay, so this is the Northern Pacific Depot. It's in Fergus Falls, Otter Tail County, and the authors are Emily Gansel and Rolf Anderson. Constructed in 1920, the Northern Pacific Depot is located just south of the Central Business District in Fergus Falls, Otter Tail County. It is a relatively long and narrow rectangular brick building with a combination hipped and gabled roof. Its footprint has not changed since its construction. The depot is an important physical reminder of the vital role that the Northern Pacific played in the development of Fergus Falls. And here we're looking at the north and west elevations. Our view here is to the southeast. As noted, the depot is in Fergus Falls. It is located in northwestern Minnesota. In this image, we see the location of the depot near the center of the map, represented by the inverted teardrop icon. Here we have a closer in view of the location of the depot just off Cascade Street in Fergus Falls. Again, its location is defined by the inverted teardrop icon. Technically, the depot's address is 200 Mill Street North. The current Northern Pacific Depot was not the first NP depot in Fergus Falls. While the depot was constructed in 1920, the building is actually the fourth NP depot in the city. The first two were destroyed by fire, while the third was demolished by the cyclone of 1919 that rolled through the city. This depot, however, was the most substantial depot built by the NP in Fergus Falls. Unlike the previous frame-constructed buildings, this depot was formed of brick and concrete construction. And at left, we're looking at the south elevation. Our view there is to the northeast. And at right is the south elevation. We're viewing to the west. The NP depot efficiently combined freight and passenger service and served as the critical interconnection point between the Northern Pacific and its customers. According to the nomination, quote, the new building was even larger than the prior passenger and freight depots combined, reflecting the increasing importance of the Northern Pacific in the area. A number of the Northern Pacific's commercial customers developed such large concerns that the railroad extended individual spur tracks directly to their properties. In fact, the Northern Pacific freight business in the city eclipsed that of its main rival, the Great Northern Railway. And even after passenger service ceased, freight business continued in importance until the depot closed in 1970. And at left, we're looking at the north elevation slash entrance. And our view there is to the southeast. And at right is the west elevation, and we're facing east. We have a couple of interior views here. At left is the former waiting room. The view is to the east. And at right is also the former waiting room. The view there is to the northwest. Some additional interior views. At bottom left, we're looking at the former baggage room with the iron grate. It's in the south wall, and the camera is facing east. And at the top center, we're looking at the original freight door. That's also in the south wall, and the camera is facing southeast. The bottom center is the former baggage room, and that's in the west wall. We're facing north. And then at the top far right is the built-in scale in the freight room, and that's facing northeast. One of the early NP depots in Fergus Falls. This image is from about 1904. The third NP depot was destroyed by the cyclone of 1919. the aftermath of which we see right here. Here are two historic photos of the current depot. The image at upper left is, that dates to circa 1920, while the photo at lower right also dates to circa 1920. By about 2012, the depot was in rough condition and was boarded up. Still, it reflected its historic appearance. It soon would find a new owner and a new life. Today, it functions as a restaurant. Our period of significance is 1920 to 1970. The level of significance is local. The National Register criterion is A. The area of significance is transportation. The period of significance begins in 1920 when the Northern Pacific Depot was constructed and continues until 1970 when operations in the building came to an end. The Northern Pacific Depot is now 100 years old. It is a tangible reminder of the important role that the NP played in the development of Fergus Falls and the surrounding area. And it now thrives today, although not in its original fashion. Still, trains continue to traverse the tracks adjacent to the depot, and the depot itself remains, changed only a little, and it continues to reflect the key railroad transportation history so vital to the city of Fergus Falls. More, the Northern Pacific Depot meets all three registration requirements for railroad depots established under National Register Criterion A, as defined in the multiple property documentation form titled Railroads in Minnesota, 1862 to 1956. For these reasons, the Northern Pacific Depot in Fergus Falls is eligible for listing in the National Register, and we do not actually have any correspondence for this.
Thank you, Dennis. Do we have any comments from members of the audience on this nomination?
Well, a board member, Schulke, I just want to say that the hope for preservation and restoration of this building was almost long gone. It stood empty for a number of years. And when the current owner purchased it and has really done a really good job of restoration, and it's once again become a vital part of the community. So kudos to the owner, and it just shows that it can happen. It may take a long time, but preservation definitely can take place.
Thank you. Any other general comments before the board discusses? Okay, and any discussion or questions from the board about this nomination?
This is board member Warner. I do have a question. So on section 7, page 6, it says here that there was a fence that was installed by the Otter Tail Valley Railroad on both sides of the building for pedestrian safety. They're iron fences featuring narrow pickets that don't obscure the building. Interestingly, it looks very similar to the fence that is near the depot here in Little Falls. And I was wondering when that fence was installed, and could it at a certain point age into being part of this property, like part of the nomination?
You know, Mary, I'm sorry, board member Warner, it could, but it's got a ways to go yet, because we got to think of the 50-year rule.
Right.
So I mean, it is definitely possible, but I think it's got a few decades to go yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Other discussion, comments, questions from the board?
I would like to comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Rolf. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Rolf, one of the authors of the proposal.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. This is Rolf Anderson. Good evening, everyone. First, I don't believe our owners could be here tonight Craig Antner and his wife. And I want to point them out because typically with a commercial property of this type, you'd expect that the property would be utilizing state and federal tax credits for rehabilitation. But the rehabilitation here was largely complete when I was approached about the nomination. You know, Craig and his wife were simply interested in designation because they felt it was the recognition that the Northern Pacific Depot building deserved. And I think it's very admirable. You know, and as Chris Schulke pointed out too, this building languished for a long time. And so this really is a great preservation success story, you know, as well. You know, finally, on a more personal note, the restaurant now serves as a restaurant, Steel Wheels. If you're in Fergus Falls, it's a very good restaurant and a good place to stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, this is Board Member Stark. I tried the hand. I don't know if that showed up or not.
Sorry, I did.
We'll keep SHPO on their edge of their seats to check for that. Thanks, Ralph. This is a great little building. I've eaten in a number of restaurants in depots, and it seems like a perfect fit. So my assumption is then that the restoration and work did not go under SHPO's guidance at this point. So there might have been some few things that were done their own way, but it was really well done. I really appreciated the fact the shed they added on was built from old drawings and modeled that, even though it was a non-contributing building. That was a nice touch by an owner. There was one little comment, very minor, and it's mentioned cyclones, and in Minnesota we don't talk about cyclones a lot, but it did say tornado one time on page 13, and then it says cyclone. So I just want to, is that the same thing? I'm not a weatherman.
Can I come?
Yeah.
Board Member Schulke, you know, we used the term back in 1919, they used the term interchangeably. They referred to it as a cyclone and a tornado. Of course, they're two different things now that we know, but so we have used the term interchangeably as well in the 100th anniversary a couple of years ago. It was a tornado. Cyclone just sounds a little more dramatic.
It does. Thank you.
Yes.
Chair Member Stark, would you prefer that we change it to maybe tornado?
No, if it was cyclone used more in the past, that's fine.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify. It was more personal knowledge than anything.
Other discussion or questions? Comments? Do we have a motion to approve?
Board Member Schulke, so moved.
Takes that honor.
Yes.
Second?
Board Member White, second.
We have a double, the W's provide a double second. Board Member Warner and Board Member White.
Frank can have it if he wants.
There,
No.
right, it was Board Member
Go
White.
ahead, Mary. That's fine.
Any other discussion before we vote? Okay, Board Member Anderson votes yes. Board Member Decker?
Aye.
Board Member Dyer?
Aye.
Board Member James?
Aye.
Board Member Koski?
Aye.
Board Member Lavasser?
Aye.
Board Member Olson?
Aye.
Board Member Schulke?
Aye.
Board Member Stark? Board Member Warner?
Aye.
And Board Member White?
Aye. And also I hope, I don't know if you heard, but I'm okay with Board Member Warner being the second.
We'll leave it to Michelle to sort that out. Thanks, everybody. And we are on next to the Lewis House and Medical Office in Henning, also Otter Tail County.
Right.
And Ginny Way is doing a presentation for us. Go ahead, Ginny.
Good evening, y'all. This is the Lewis House and Medical Office. in Henning, Otter Tail County. The author is Rolf Anderson. Next. Located at 415 Douglas Avenue in Henning, Minnesota, the Lewis House and Medical Office consists of a 1914 combination residence and office and a 1948 medical office addition. The medical building reflects the broad range of expertise a rural doctor was required to possess during much of the 20th century. Throughout its history, the practice not only served the town of Henning, but also the surrounding rural population of roughly 10,000. On the left is the USGS map of Henning. The property is indicated with the blue arrow. At right is a closer view of the property boundary indicated by the white line. Next. The Prairie style residence was originally constructed to serve the dual purpose of residence for Dr. Lewis and his family, as well as medical office, with a hall separating the uses. While Dr. Lewis and his family accessed the house using the main extant entrance, patients entered the office through a separate entrance along the southeast side of the building, visible at right of the historic photo. At left, we see the southwest and southeast elevations of the original building, camera facing north, and at right is almost an identical view of the house in 1914. Next. Family quarters on the first floor included the living room, entered through a wide archway off the main hallway, followed by a dining room and a kitchen. At left is a view of the living room toward the dining room, camera facing northeast, and at right is a view from the dining room back into the living room, camera facing southwest. Next. The second story included 6 bedrooms organized off a wide hallway. The width of the hallway was said to have been a deliberate choice by Dr. Lewis, as he envisioned the upper story serving as future hospital space. This never came to fruition, however, and the second floor continued to be used exclusively for residential purposes. Here we see the second floor hallway with doors to bedrooms and a bathroom, camera facing southwest. Next. In 1924, Dr. Lewis invited Dr. James Vail to join his practice. To provide more space for the medical office, the porch was enclosed in 1928. At right is a 1934 photograph that shows the exterior of the building after the porch was enclosed, and at left we see the interior of the enclosed porch, camera facing southwest. Next. While the original layout of the office portion of the building is not known, it likely included an exam room, office, and storage. The enclosed porch allowed for surgery space and an x-ray room. The medical office was originally accessed from the residence by a single door from the building's central hallway. In the post-war years, the practice grew substantially. In 1946, Charles William Lewis, the son of Dr. A.J. and Clara Lewis, joined his father's medical practice. 2 years later, in early 1948, Dr. J. Curvern also joined the practice. At left, we see a view from the residential area into the former medical office, camera facing northeast. And at right is the entrance vestibule, camera facing southwest. Next. In 1948, the medical office was enlarged with a one-story addition that is attached to the southeast elevation of the residence. The addition is decidedly modern in style, although materials are similar. The corridor of the new building intersects with the broad hallway that connects the addition to the original building. The rear entrance, which served patients arriving by ambulance, also opens onto this hallway. At right, we see the 1948 addition, southwest and southeast elevations, camera facing north. And at left is a 1983 sketch plan of the medical office building and addition. Next. On the main level, the addition held a reception area and waiting room, as well as 2 offices for physicians, 2 exam rooms, a laboratory, and a restroom. The lower level included space for conducting eye examinations, and at one time it provided space for a dental office. When the addition was remodeled to become the Landmark Center, partitions were removed on the main level between the 3 rooms on the northerly side of the original hallway. This created a large L shape that also included the reception area and waiting room. At left is the main level of the 1948 addition, camera facing northwest. And at right are pieces of the Lewis medical practice on display in the basement of the addition, camera facing north. Next. Rural medicine in the early 20th century was often fraught with difficulties. Supplies, help, and reliable access to patients, especially in the winter, required that doctors be particularly industrious and able to treat patients with a wide range of ailments. While offices were critical to success and coveted by towns, much of a doctor's time was spent on house calls, leaving nurses, and in this case, sometimes Mrs. Lewis, to handle minor injuries. At left is the southwest elevation of the 1914 building, camera facing northeast. And at right is a circa 1920 of a nurse and a baby on the building steps. Next. Regular concerns included lacerations, accidents, and bursts, but rural doctors also had to contend with larger epidemics like flu and pandemic of 1918-1919, typhoid fever, pneumonia, and later polio, smallpox, and diphtheria. In order to be self-sufficient, the physicians at the Lewis Medical Office conducted tests such as electrocardiograms and did their own lab work as well as developed x-rays. Dr. Charles Lewis was known for his plastic surgeries and for saving limbs and creating facial reconstructions after accidents. He was also known for his diagnostic abilities in identifying conditions such as carbon monoxide poison and venison-induced trichinosis. At left is the southeast and northeast elevations of the 1948 edition, camera facing west. At right is the southeast elevation of the 1914 building, camera facing northwest. Next. Dr. A.J. Lewis continued to practice medicine until his death until 1962 at the age of 79. Dr. Charles Lewis retired in 1980. In 1984, Dr. John Wiggert, a member of the practice, purchased the house and medical office from the Lewis family. In 1990, Dr. Wiggert moved his practice to a new medical clinic 1 block from the Lewis property, ending the building's tenure as a medical office. Here we see two views of the 1914 building. At left is the northeast elevation, camera facing west. At right is the northwest elevation, camera facing east. Next. The period of significance for this property is 1914 to 1971. The level of significance is local. National Register criterion is A, and the area of significance is health and medicine. The period of significance is 1914 to 1971, reflecting the property's continued use as a medical facility from 1914 to 1990 and respecting the National Park Service's convention of ending the period of significance 50 years prior to listing. The Lewis House and Medical Office provided a vital service, next. The Lewis House and Medical Office provided a vital service to residents of Henning and the surrounding farms and nearby communities for over 75 years. The building represents the development of medical practices over the decades, as the office evolved from a typical rural practice into a modern clinic during the post-World War II era. For these reasons, it is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. We have no correspondence related to this property.
Thanks, Jenny. Mm-hmm. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to make a comment to the group, to the board?
I assume Rolf would. We'll go ahead and introduce him.
Thank you, Jenny. There we go. Rolf would like to speak. Go ahead, Rolf.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. A few comments. First, a number of people to thank. First, Dan Broughton, who manages the building for the city of Henning, and for all the help he provided. Also, I know we have Lewis family members with us here tonight, Marty and John, Todd, and Laura, who observed this process with great expectation and have been so helpful. It was, I think, so vital that the family had such good records and allowed me access to them, which really helped to tell the story in such a complete way. I was never expecting, for example, to find a construction photo of the house or a photo of a nurse with a baby standing on the steps, or correspondence between Dr. A.J. Lewis and his wife in the very, very early years that provided such insight, into the practice. Also, interviewing local individuals is quite remarkable and unexpected on my part, that I'll be interviewing individuals who could recall their family experiences with Dr. Lewis dating back to the 1920s and 1930s. Another person on with us tonight here is Dr. Weigert, the last physician to practice in the building. But taken together, it really allowed for a very complete story of the medical practice, and I think it really informed us in a very meaningful way about rural medicine. And through the decades, decade after decade, not just sporadically here and there. And the one, I think, more modern study that referenced comparisons between rural and modern medicine remarked how there seems to be such limited information about rural medicine. And I think that's quite true. And for that reason, I think this nomination of the Lewis property really informs us in such a meaningful way, about rural medicine. Also, I wanted to remark how this is the second project I've done in Henning and worked with Dan Broughton. I just wanted to talk about the impact of legacy funding and historic preservation. Henning had no properties on the National Register until Trinity Lutheran Church, a nomination I also prepared. That building too was taken on by the city. So we have a very small town taking a leap of faith, taking on two buildings. And legacy money has made such a difference for them. The nomination for the Trinity Church was prepared through legacy funding. And Dan has told me that it looks like they may now be receiving a grant for bricks and mortar funding to repair the spire. Also, the nomination for the Lewis House was done through a legacy grant, and hopefully that legacy funding will continue. And I think this is an important example of how legacy money really has promoted historic preservation in rural Minnesota, particularly in small towns that aren't particularly familiar with preservation, or where there's many misconceptions about National Register and so forth. It occurred to me that Henning might be a very good town to showcase in terms of the impact of legacy funding, and this might be a good suggestion for us to make with the grants department. So again, I just think a very important nomination, and one that I think that turned out to be meaningful in so many ways that I wasn't expecting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph. Any other comments from the audience?
Jenny, this is Dan Broughton.
Hi, Dan. Yes, please go. And then Marty will, I saw that you raised your hand. Well, if you'll wait just a second for me.
Oh, do you want to let Marty go first? I can't seem to get my camera to come in, so you can let Marty talk first.
Marty, are you ready?
Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. This is just a very, very personal reflection on what this building meant to us. So I'm Marty Lewis Hunstiger. My dad, Charles Lewis, is the one they mentioned who was able to diagnose trichinosis and various things. My brother Todd and my sister Nancy and my brother John are here. Our cousin Laura has been trying to get on. I don't know if she's been able to. But we are so grateful to Ralph and to Dan for everything you've done to move this thing forward. It's now called the Landmark Center, and for the application, it's the Lewis House and Medical Office, but for us, it was always the big house. For us, it was totally normal that the home our fathers were born in and our grandparents lived in, where we had tons of sleepovers, and then where our grandpa died, was separated by only a door. I heard you mention the door. I think it had a lock, but if I remember right, the key was safety pinned to the curtain that was right inside the door. But there was a wall with a door. But didn't everybody's house have a door, which you just walked through to where people came to have Dad and Grandpa and Jake Kevin take care of them? Prenatal and well baby care, sports and camp physicals, blood drawn and studied, x-rays taken and developed and read. I remember the big vats of developer fluid. diathermy treatments, glasses fitted. One night I was jumping on the bed in Grandma's room and I fell and hit my head on the radiator. And it was totally normal to go downstairs and go through the door and Grandpa sutured up my scalp. It just seemed like everybody's house was like that. There was a summer camp nearby, Lutheran Island Camp. And our dad knew which campers that were brought into the office needed to have blood work. He always said, pain in the right lower quadrant is appendix unless proven otherwise. And which ones just needed to have him say, you feeling kind of homesick? In the early days, Grandma went through that door and worked with Grandpa. She administered ether. She helped with births. I don't know if she ever sutured, but I remember that she could remove fish hooks as well as anybody in town, especially if Grandpa was out on a call. So this is the main thing I want to convey. Growing up hearing or overhearing the conversations in the big house, and then in our house that we grew up in, which was 2 blocks away, when it functioned as an extension of the office, we learned what confidentiality really means in a small town. In the days before home pregnancy tests and evening appointment with teenagers, their parents, and their minister, which neighbors were struggling with alcoholism or mental illness, merchants and farmers who needed to wait for a sale to come through or for the harvest to pay their bill. Everyone would expect Grandpa and Dad and Jay and Dr. Weigert to keep these confidences, but our grandmother and their other children and our mother and the people who worked in the office, and as we grew up, we kids, we knew important, vulnerable things that we kept in trust. We learned by example how to live in a code of ethics, and the extended big house is where we learned it. I hope this conveys a little bit of the sense of place, and I'm hoping that the historic designation will help people learn more about the story of healthcare in Hennepin.
Thanks, Marty.
That was lovely. I think Kristen, I think Dan wanted to speak as well. Is that?
Are you ready,
right?
Dan?
Yeah, I can't get my camera to work, I'm sorry, but I'll just be very brief here. I just wanted to say a special thank you. As you guys mentioned before, I've been dealing with Minnesota Historical and the SHPO office since 2015, getting involved in the Trinity as well as now the Landmark Center. And I just want to say thank you to Dennis Gardner, John Fulton, Ginny Way, and Melinda especially for putting out a lot of fires for me, always being available to answer the phone, answer questions for me when I had questions on how to proceed with a grant or how to proceed with writing something up. Chris Schulke with the Otter Tail Historical Society. I especially want to thank Chris for your guidance, your encouragement to highlight and celebrate local history. You were the one that first brought both the Trinity and the Landmark to my attention that has the potential for its historic value. And you got me on board to help educate our community and the significance of highlighting those properties and putting them on a pedestal so that we can realize what we have and save them for the future. And we aren't done yet, I hope. Chris, continues also to do some historic walking tours through Henning, so we're educating the community as to the value of the history in our town. Thanks to the Lewis family and the extended Lewis family for all of your input, saving the history that you've shared with us to make this story come to light. And also, I wanted to say a special thank you to David Holmgren, who was a former mayor and a founding member of the Landmark Center when it began back in 2006. The Esplin family in town, which actually helped acquire this building so that it could be available for public usage as we go forward. And especially John Weigert and his family for allowing us to take over this property so that it could be available for public usage. They could have easily kept this for their own personal use, but they were gracious enough to allow us to explore the history of the building and share it with the community and also use the building for public purposes. So that's it. Thank you to everybody for helping us get across this goal. I feel very excited. It's been several years in the making here. So thank you. And Rolf Anderson, by the way. Thank you, Rolf. You helped me with both properties. Don't forget Rolf. So there you go. That's it.
Thanks. Any other comments before the board starts to discuss?
Chair Anderson, I have a comment and also a question.
Board Member White?
So I love reading these narratives, these stories. I have while I really respect all medical individuals, it sounds like the home visits, at least during the wintertime and probably other times, were such a challenge, and I just can't even imagine what that meant, not only to the doctors attempting to get there, but also for the families waiting for them to get there. I just, what an appreciation again for those doctors and the things they did and the things they went through. So I just love the history. And then my question is, can Daniel or Rolf or Chris tell us what that statue is in the photo?
Can I jump in on that one?
Yes.
We have a local artist in our community. He's actually in Vining, Minnesota, which is 5 miles away. His name is Ken Nyberg. He creates metal sculptures. He's got a collection of them in Vining area, and is also at his shop, which is in Vining. You may also recognize that name. His daughter is an astronaut who's been up to space several times. But Ken creates these sculptures, and when the Landmark Center building was being purchased from Dr. Weigert, and for 3 years being renovated to be turned into the Landmark Center, our former mayor, David Holmgren, commissioned Ken Nyberg to create this doughboy. It's a World War I doughboy, just to commemorate the history of the veterans in our area. And he had that place there as for that reason. We are also a history center. We have a little history museum in our basement. So I think that was his reasoning there. The little quirk I have is that I think some people think that we are maybe the VFW in hall in town or something because of that sculpture. But we're working on another piece from Ken that will be more artistic in a way that will not be so military. So anyway, that's what that is. If you're ever in the building, which maybe Rolf, you've stayed in this building when you were doing research, you can probably attest that when you're in there in the evening and you see this guy out the window at night, he can make you jump, standing there with his weapon. So that's who he is.
I have a comment, if possible. This is Nancy Lewis Benziger speaking to you from Hawaii. I noted that on the very first page of the presentation, you said that this was a local impact or local importance. And I would actually take issue with that, because one of the things that really applies to the practice here and to my dad's and grandpa's practice in rural Minnesota was its global reach. As we were hearing about the work that they would do in terms of patient care, I'm remembering Dad's talking with about his colleagues in all the other small towns around Henning. And their names were Dr. Liu, Dr. Ed Liu, Dr. Hom, Dr. Nakagakis from Battle Lake, the Orandis from Fergus Falls, some of his limb restorations where he saved someone's foot. One was carried out by telephone. The person talking him through this delicate sewing back together of blood vessels in a child's injured foot was Dr. Bhattacharya, who was a vascular surgeon. He was from India. Doctors Liu and Hom, their background was China. the medical practice then really had a global reach, and many of these people from the wider world had come to practice medicine in our area. So I think it was really act locally, but thinking globally. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Before the board takes over? Okay, any discussion from the board about this nomination or any questions that you have as you heard about it or as you did your reading? Anyone from the board? Amy, are you seeing anything?
I'm not seeing any hands.
This is Board Member Warner. I had dog interruptions here. We had to shoo them out of the room. In reading through the nomination, I noted that there was just a very small amount of information about Clara Lewis, and we just heard several other things that I'm like, oh, it would be so nice to have those actually, some of the specific things that she did added to the nomination. It cannot have been easy to run a medical practice with the doctors away all the time, and she's left there and has to handle everything.
Rolf, do you feel like through your research you had enough information to maybe bolster at least that information just a little bit?
Well, I mean, she is referenced in terms of she would step in when Dr. AJ was on house calls and so forth. So I think the point was covered. I think to expand it further, we'd have to do more research with family members and so forth.
I think I felt like it was covered well. To Board Member Warner's point, we are trying our best to expand significance and story to include a much broader concept of what we normally would. I think in this case, Board Member Warner, it might take a significant amount of additional research in order to bolster that story, but we certainly will keep it in mind when it comes to updating the nomination should oral tradition or other projects come through the grants office. We can certainly remember it and keep it in our back pocket if anything seems to dovetail. Rolf, I do the question that Board Member White brought up. We should add that statue to the document and note that
it is noted.
Oh my goodness, you're so good.
Yeah.
Thanks. I should never even question Rolf when it comes to stuff like that. He's so thorough. I was focused on the boundary this morning, making sure that was accurate. All those technical pieces that I'm stuck with that aren't the story. So thank you for that.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
A question, but I don't know how to raise my hand.
Is that Board Member James?
Yes, Board Member James.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to know, Rolf, if you discovered in your research how the Lewis House helped develop the medical care or hospital center or things surrounding that. I seem to recall part of the story where there was a doctor working there and then moved two blocks away. And I'm wondering if the energy from that house inspired healthcare locally, or if there's any relation. And I don't know much about Henning, and I'm curious, like, where's the closest medical center now? Just curious about these.
Yeah, in the historic period, the hospital, the nearest hospital that was constructed was in Wadena, to the east of Henning, and Dr. Lewis then was a practicing physician there, as were the physicians that followed him. So they did have access to the hospital facility there, and of course promoted its construction. I think then it was really that hospital system that then was behind the modern clinic that is in Henning today, now known as the Tri-County system. So that is the system that then provides medical services in Henning today.
This is Nancy Lewis Benziger. I have an additional comment to address that question. Another clear-cut example of the energy that came from this practice was the development of the nursing home in Henning. Dr. Charles Lewis and others were the ones who originally, they were the reason that came about. An early sort of advance guard for care of senior citizens.
Thank you so much for that answer. As I was reading the nomination, I kept thinking about all the different networks of healthcare that connect to like actual hospitalization, and because there was these pioneering medical practices, I was just curious about how it might have germinated in other areas. I live in Morris right now, and I have to travel to Minneapolis sometimes, but I've also learned that there are local people who are specialists and have their different referrals. It's just a really interesting way healthcare and medical practice is spread. So it was a joy to read about.
Thanks, Board Member James. Any other comments or discussion from the board? Are we ready for a motion?
Board Member Schuelke, I'll represent Otter Tail County once again and make a motion to approve the Lewis House for a nomination.
Board Member Schuelke, is there a second? Second for the nomination?
This is Board Member Warner. I will second.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion or questions before we vote? Okay, Board Member Decker.
Aye.
Board Member Dyer.
Aye.
Board Member James. I think you're muted, Board Member James. I saw a little nod there.
Aye.
Thank you. Board Member Koski.
Aye.
Board Member Lavasser.
Aye.
Board Member Olson.
Aye.
Board Member Schuelke.
Aye.
Board Member Stark.
Aye.
Board Member Warner.
Aye.
Board Member White.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you very much, everyone. And next we're on to the Hopkins Commercial Historic District in Hopkins, Hennepin County, presented by Dennis Gardner.
Okay, yes, this is the Hopkins Commercial Historic District. It's in Hopkins, Hennepin County. There are a number of authors, Gregory R. Mathis, Maggie Jones, and Stephanie Atwood. They're all of MnDOT. And then we have Mary Romportal, who is part of the Hopkins Historical Society. The Hopkins Commercial Historic District is located just to the west of Minneapolis. The city is one of the Twin Cities' western suburbs. The buildings in the commercial district sit adjacent to Main Street, which was originally known as Excelsior Avenue. And in this photo, we're looking at the northeast corner of Main Street and 9th Avenue. Our camera is facing northeast. And from left to right, we're looking at the International Order of Oddfellows Lodge, the Anderson Building, and the Olson Building. Here we see the district. It is roughly 3 blocks long and is very cohesive. This National Register nomination was completed by the Cultural Resources Unit at the MnDOT and is the result of a memorandum of agreement that was agreed upon when the Southwest Light Rail project was established and designed to pass through Hopkins. In essence, the nomination is a measure to avoid an adverse effect to the district. As part of this effort, the MnDOT completed public education outreach earlier this year, which included notifying owners of properties in the district about the nomination and holding an informational meeting with them so they could learn about what National Register listing means and the financial incentives that are possible with this. The Hopkins Commercial Historic District reflects downtown Hopkins during its heyday, which was surprisingly long. It ran from the late 1800s to the late 1900s, which is unusual for many historic districts. Hopkins certainly had its commercial ups and downs, but it always rebounded and came roaring back. It was the commercial, social, and entertainment hub of Hopkins for 8 decades. And at left, we're looking at the south side of the 900 block of Main Street, and that's facing southeast between 9th and 10th Avenues. From right to left, we're looking at the Swanson Building, the Johnson Building, the Johnson Brothers Building, the Olson Building, and Clock Tower Plaza, with the Olson and Dow Building in the distance. And at right is Main Street, and we're facing west at 8th Street. Following World War II, Hopkins quickly evolved into a Minneapolis suburb as numerous industries and businesses built major facilities in the city's growing boundaries. But unlike many growing suburbs where shopping centers and strip malls became the new commercial centers of the community, the historic district maintained its role as the commercial center of Hopkins during this period. And at left, we're at the southeast corner of Main Street and 9th Avenue. We're facing southeast, and the Olson and Down Building is at the center, and the Koblos Building is at left. The right image shows the Albert Pike Lodge, number 237, and that's facing north. Here we got the south side of the 900 block of Main Street. We're facing southwest at 9th Avenue. From left to right, we have the Clock Tower Plaza, which is actually non-contributing. The Olson Block, Johnson Brothers Building, Swanson Building, Smetana Building, the Post Office Annex, and the Anderson Brothers Building. And at right is the Opera Hall, and that is facing southwest. In this streetscape, we see the Gamble's building at the far right. It is an example of a non-contributing building. It has a modern stucco facade. It is a 1956 building that has a highly altered facade that dates to after the period of significance. And our view there is to the northwest. And here we have a very early view of downtown Hopkins. This image dates to 1902, July of 1902. Two additional historic views of downtown Hopkins. The image at left is circa 1910, while the image at right is circa 1920. The International Order of Oddfellows Lodge is depicted at left in 1922, and the Opera House is shown at right in 1956. Two additional images of downtown Hopkins about the middle of the 20th century. The photo at left is 1958, and that at right is roughly 1959. You can see the Gamble store at far right in the right image. In the early 1970s, the city undertook a series of improvement efforts to increase the popularity of the downtown, including efforts to beautify the street, adding trees and curving the roadway. It did not offset the loss of commerce to the downtown, though, with Ridgedale Mall just a short distance away. Eventually, the roadway was restored to its historic linear alignment. This image is a rendering from 1972 and depicts the Welcome Mall plan. While the mall was in fact built, it did not last. Our period of significance is 1890 to 1972, and our level of significance is local. The National Register criterion is A, and the area of significance is commerce. The period of significance begins in 1890, which corresponds with the construction of the oldest extant building in the district, and ends in 1972, which marked the last major improvements in the district. Soon thereafter, the district began a significant decline in commercial activity. For more than 8 decades, the Hopkins Commercial Historic District was the center of commercial activity in Hopkins. The district thrived from its platting in the latter part of the 20th century when commercial activity began. The district thrived from its platting in the latter part of the 20th century when commercial activity began to substantially decline. But during those decades, it was vibrant. It was the social, commercial, and entertainment hub of Hopkins. For this reason, it is eligible for listing in the National Register. And we got 2 pieces of correspondence. They came in very late today. One is from the city of Hopkins itself that notes that they strongly support listing of the district in the National Register. But we did have one piece of correspondence where they objected. They objected to listing. And it's building 1011 on Main Street. And they just objected to the formal listing in the National Register.
Are there any comments from members of the audience tonight? To speak about this?
Like we've got 2 people. We have Mary Portal, and then I thought I saw, Greg Mathis.
Mary, why don't you go ahead first? Mary, are you there? Okay, Greg, how about you? Greg, are you ready to speak?
Sure. Thank you. This is Greg Mathis from Minneapolis, one of the authors. And I just, again, as Dennis said, this is a collaborative effort with between our office and the Hopkins Historical Society. Mary, who hopefully will jump on here in just a moment, was instrumental in doing a lot of the local research for us within their archives, and we greatly appreciate that, and did a lot of the editing for us. We really appreciate her work. We also appreciate the work of Kristen Elverum with the city, who helped us get a lot of the building permits. And we also want to thank Jackie Becker, who's also with MnDOT. She's not listed on the nomination, but she is in our title office and helps, or land management office, excuse me, and helped us do a lot of the title research for the project. And then, as Dennis mentioned, this is a mitigation item for the Southwest Light Rail project. The district was identified in 2010 as part of a Section 106 survey for that project and was determined eligible. And so this listing will help avoid an adverse effect from potential development by opening the door to tax credits and other benefits that will support the long-term preservation in an area that's going to be seeing more development as the LRT opens in a couple years. And thank you.
Thanks, Greg. And Mary, are you there? Would you like to comment? Or anyone else? Jen Stark, I see you. Just hang on a second, see if there's anyone else from the audience who'd like to speak. All right, Board Member Stark.
Go for the unmute here. Greg and everybody who wrote this was a really well done presentation and writing on this. I love the way it tells the stories of each of the buildings that were there and the tenants that were in there. And I live in St. Louis Park, so I'm right next door, and I've been here for 30 years, and I learned a lot about Hopkins. So that was fun. I do have a few questions because of the history and the company town kind of that it was, and being called West Minneapolis. The Hopkins name keeps popping up, and I'm wondering if they were interchangeable and reused, because they talk about the Hopkins News from 1900, 1906 and stuff like that. And there's also on page 12, there's a photo. It says around 1920, but it says Hopkins, Minnesota printed on the photo. And the other question and stuff, and the Excelsior Avenue being Main Street now, there's also Excelsior Boulevard, which I think is County Road or Highway 3 to the south, just the change of that. But if Greg or someone could comment on that, I'd really appreciate
it. Sure, I can try and answer that. So we tried to spell this out in the nominations. A lot of this dates back to the founding of the first railroad station, which was in Minneapolis and St. Louis, when they came through in 1870-71. So the land was donated for the state, or the depot, excuse me, with the stipulation that it be named Hopkins. And so that was the name that it started out with, but there was no formal community at that point. It was just mostly a rural settlement with farmhouses. When MTM came in, they did create a land company and established the original act, and for whatever reason they named it West Minneapolis. And I think I mentioned this in the nomination. We're not sure why they did that. The best we can tell, that MTM was backed by the Minneapolis, I think it's not Chamber of Commerce, but Commercial Club, excuse me. And so we think that it was named West Minneapolis simply for trying to create a proximity to Minneapolis. And that's where the West Minneapolis name came from. And that was the first official name. And then the city, and so there was that dichotomy between Hopkins and West Minneapolis for several decades before the city voted to officially change its name in the 1920s to Hopkins.
Right.
And
so
then,
it would have been used interchangeably then. Okay.
Yeah, until they officially changed the name. And then in terms of Excelsior, so it was originally Excelsior Avenue that ran down the current alignment of what is now Main Street in Hopkins. As far as we can tell, and the records are a little sketchy, we think when that was shifted over to its present alignment, was named Hopkins or Excelsior Boulevard. And so Excelsior Avenue, which is what's now Main Street, and Excelsior Boulevard existed for a while they coexisted for a number of years until 1973 when it was renamed Main Street.
Okay. The one last comment, thanks, Greg. One last comment I do have is on, page 80 and 81, there's some plot maps. And I would just flip them so that the first one is the top of the page, and then Excelsior Boulevard ends up at the bottom, and then the second one would be Excelsior Boulevard at the top, and then everything south, so it would fit together more chronologically.
John,
does that make sense?
Yep, John, we can certainly do that. If you don't mind sending me an email.
Send you an email. Yep, I'll do that.
Yep, and we'll take care of that.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments or questions from the board?
This is Board Member Warner. I have kind of a weird question. There was discussion on pages 54 and 55 of there being all of these strip malls built that drew traffic away from Hopkins. And so then Hopkins, they start taking down some buildings and creating parking lots so that they have more parking to draw people back. And it got me to wondering if a parking lot could ever be considered a part of a district. Is that something that ever happens?
Mary, the answer is yes. It certainly can be considered part of a district. It's interesting because the National Park Service is very vague on parking lots. And, sometimes they're considered part of a district and sometimes they're not. A lot of times it comes down to how substantial the parking lot is. and I don't think the National Park Service has really made up its mind yet, just how it's going to view parking lots.
It was just so interesting to have, that spark of insight as I'm reading that they created the parking lots because of the strip malls. And so I'm like, oh, that literally is part of the history here. So it just really struck me as a question that I should ask and find out.
No, it's an interesting question, and I know that Jenny and I have talked about it sometimes, how do you view those parking lots? And it's like the National Park Service just hasn't made up its mind, what it's supposed to be. But I think if we could make the argument that, the parking lot is there for a reason, we could call that contributing.
Thanks, Dennis.
Board Member Olson has had his hand up. Steve, are you ready?
Just other than a fresh hankering for raspberries after talking about Hopkins here. Just a couple things. I don't think I've ever seen a nomination or a district with so many architectural styles listed up front. So I think it will take some clever people on the HPC in Hopkins to navigate what becomes sympathetic as part of new development. And I guess my other comment is I heard people talking about this nomination being mitigation to prevent an adverse determination. I always thought mitigation only came after there was an adverse determination. So I guess if that dynamic could be discussed a little bit, that would be helpful for me.
Sure. Greg, is there a way we could work in something into the nomination?
So is the question, Steve, about adding something into the nomination to explain the rationale, or was it more wanting to understand whether it was mitigation or a minimization or an avoidance effort?
Yeah, I guess I was always taught, maybe I was taught wrong, that it was mitigation after an adverse effect. And here you're sort of, it sounds like trying to minimize the adverse effect or impact to the region. So it seems a little different than the process I'm used to hearing about, Greg.
Yeah, I can try and maybe elaborate on this here. Let me grab something. So what we said in the actual memorandum of agreement for the project. So for that project, we have a number of properties where there's no adverse effect, a couple where there's adverse effects, and then we have a number of other ones, which include this district where FTA and the project agreed to implement a number of measures to avoid an adverse effect. So where we have adverse effects on certain properties, we're actually doing mitigation for that. This one is a measure to avoid an adverse effect. So it's not mitigation of the adverse effect, it's a measure to avoid it.
Okay.
This is Chairperson Anderson. I just had a comment that's maybe as much for Dennis and Ginny as it is for the authors. And maybe I'm just dreaming about all this, but I found it so much easier to understand what was going on as I correlated text to the buildings based on the captions of the photographs. I think, as I recall, sometimes we get addresses as the identification for the photographs. And I'm always, maybe I'm into words and not numbers, but it was so much easier to see that something was the Gardner building or the Mathis building or the Schulke building in the captions, and I could sort of follow the narrative a little bit better than looking at a chart or looking at a map and finding an address. And so I just found it really helpful, and maybe it's always been that way and I just don't remember it, but today it seemed to be just much easier for me to read it and go back and forth between text and illustration. So I really appreciated that.
Chair Anderson, I think you're right. I think you're right. Sometimes we've been inconsistent on this, and I thought this was quite well done. And maybe this should be our model for districts going forward, just to make it easier for the board. you know, to understand and follow what is going on.
I really appreciated it. So yeah, I'd love to see more like this and fewer just identified with street number and street name. And anyone else from the board have a question or comment? I'm just scanning the list here. Are we ready for a motion?
This is Board Member Stark. I'd like to make a motion to nominate the Hopkins Historic District to the National Register.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Board Member Decker, I second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, then we vote. Board Member Decker.
Aye.
Board Member Dyer.
Aye.
Board Member James.
Aye.
Board Member Koski.
Aye.
Board Member Lavasser.
Aye.
Board Member Olson.
Aye.
Board Member Schulke.
Aye.
Board Member Stark.
Aye.
Board Member Warner.
Aye.
Board Member White.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Thanks, everyone. And we hit the halfway point with the Church of the Incarnation and Rectory, Minneapolis, Hennepin County. Dennis.
Yes, this is the Church of the Incarnation and the Rectory. It's in Minneapolis, Hennepin County. The authors are Lauren Anderson and Tamara Lute of New History. Constructed in 1918, the Church of the Incarnation is an excellent example of the academic eclecticism practiced by many American architects in the early 20th century. The dark-hued brick building was designed by Emmanuel Louis Masqueret, a notable architect in Minnesota's history. Masqueret was the designer of several churches in the Twin Cities area, including the Cathedral of St. Paul and the Basilica of St. Mary in Minneapolis. The property includes a rectory that was completed in 1913, just to the south of the church. That was designed in the colonial revival style. The rectory contributes to the overall property. The church itself was patterned in Romanesque and Italian Renaissance revival styles. And here we're looking at the north and west elevations of the church. Our view here is to the southeast. The church is located in South Minneapolis, just to the northeast of Lake Harriet. Although somewhat difficult to see, the black arrow on this map points to its location. Here's a closer view of the property, and we're showing the church and the rectory, which is just to the south. And we have a streetscape view of the north and east elevations of the church. And our view here is to the southwest. The Church of the Incarnation was authorized by Archbishop John Ireland in 1909. It was the first Catholic parish located south of Lake Street. Services were initially attended in the Ark Lodge Masonic Temple at the intersection of 31st Street and 1st Avenue North. The parish initially built a school in 1909 and followed this with a rectory in 1913. The church itself was erected in 1918. And at left, we're looking at the west facade. Our camera is facing northeast. And at right is the south elevation. Our camera there is facing to the northeast as well, is facing to the northeast. The design of the church is Romanesque and Italian Renaissance revival styles, although it has been described variously as Italian Romanesque and Italian Basilica style. In any event, Masqueret once again demonstrated his brilliance in design, for he created a truly striking church. To the left is the north elevation and the east rear, and our view there is to the southwest. And at right is the south elevation and the east rear. A non-contributing garage building is in the foreground. The camera is facing to the northwest. At left, we see the facade of the rectory just south of the church building. The camera is facing east. And at right is the arcade that leads from the church to the rectory. And the view there is to the north. At left is the church nave. We're looking toward the chancel. Our view there is to the southeast. And at right is the church nave looking toward the balcony, and the view there is to the west. The interior of the church retains most of its historic vertical and horizontal patterns of circulation, exposed structure, and relatively utilitarian finishes at the lower level. The nave is impressive and is ornately designed, as is the chancel, narthex, sacristy, baptistry, and choir loft. And the nave and chancel, which are perhaps the centerpiece of the building's architectural design, remain virtually unchanged since the building was erected. At left, we're looking at the first level side chapel. Our view there is to the south. And at the middle is the altar in the baptistry. The view there is to the northeast. And at right is the north transept. The camera is facing northeast. Left is the narthex. The camera is facing south. Middle is the stairway from the lower level of the church to the arcaded walkway. And the camera there is facing southeast. And at right is the sacristy. The camera there is facing northeast. And at left, we're looking at the first level south meeting room in the rectory. The view there is to the southeast. And at right, we're looking at the first level dining room in the rectory, and the view there is to the north. And here we're looking at a first level office in the rectory. Our view here is to the northeast. And here we have two historic views of the church. At left is a photo of the church about 1920. And at right is an image around 1959. Here we have an interior view of the church during a wedding in 1940. Our period of significance is 1913 to 1932. The level of significance is local. The National Register criterion is C, and the area of significance is architecture. But we also have to take into consideration criteria consideration A. The period of significance begins in 1913 with the construction of the rectory and ends in 1932 when the arcaded walkway from the rectory to the church was completed. As a religious property deriving primary significance from its architectural design, the church meets criterion consideration A. Designed by Emmanuel Masqueret, and a fine example of the academic eclecticism practiced by many American architects in the early 20th century, the Church of the Incarnation is eligible for listing in the National Register for its architecture, as is the rectory, which is a fine example of colonial revival architecture. And it is a building contributing to the overall property. And here we have one piece of correspondence. In a letter dated November 10th, 2021, the Minneapolis Department of Community Planning and Economic Development, writing on behalf of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission, notes the HBC supports nomination of the Church of the Incarnation and Rectory to the National Register. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Dennis. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to make a statement or has a comment about this nomination? Statement? I don't see any hands raised. All right, so it's up to the board to say lots of smart things and ask some great questions. Anybody on the board have a comment or a question?
Madam Chair, this is Frank White.
Thank you.
This is a beautiful church. Father Kevin McDonough is now there, and last year he baptized my 5th grandchild. And so I'm very familiar with the church. It is beautiful inside, and looking at the building outside it is really a significant architectural structure.
Thank you, Board Member White. Other comments or questions?
This is Father McDonough, the pastor.
Well,
Can I speak briefly?
yes, please.
I simply want to say two things. Number one, I'm so grateful to the review board. It's a longtime member of the Ramsey County Historical Society board and know the great love and work that goes into the kind of things you're doing. So I'm grateful to you. And the other thing I want to say to my friend Frank is you and I need to be careful because you and I are more historic than many of these buildings. But thank you all for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father Kevin.
Other comments or questions? Just scanning for any raised hands. I don't see any. Amy, are you seeing anything that I'm missing here?
I am not.
Okay. I did have a question about some terminology that maybe if the authors, one of the authors is here, Dennis can maybe help with this. The nave wings, is that the aisle? The side aisle space?
Sure, Chair Anderson. Sure, you know, if I know that, you know, when it comes to church architecture, you're one of the real experts on this. And so I take what you have to say to heart. And if you have questions, you know, about certain things, you know, with the architecture, please, you know, if you could send me an email, let me know, and we'll include it.
Okay.
You know, we'll definitely include it.
Thank you. I just asked that because I wanted to give people a chance to come up with some other questions. And evidently no one has, so it looks like we're ready for a motion.
Board Member Schulke, I nominate this building for the National Register.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Board Member White, second.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Okay. So we'll vote. Board Member Decker?
Aye.
Board Member Dyer?
Aye.
Board Member James?
Aye.
Board Member Koski?
Aye.
Board Member Lavasser?
Aye.
Board Member Olson?
Aye.
Board Member Schulke?
Aye.
Board Member Stark?
Aye.
Board Member Warner?
Aye.
And Board Member White?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Thanks very much, everyone. And next is St. Olaf's Norwegian Lutheran Church, Minneapolis, Hennepin County. And Dennis.
Okay, yes, this is St. Olaf's Norwegian Lutheran Church. The authors are Kelly Wolf and Alyssa R. Otten of Blondo Consulting, LLC. St. Olaf's Norwegian Lutheran Church is located on Emerson Avenue in North Minneapolis, several blocks west of US Highway 94. Sheathed in dark-hued brick, the church is Gothic Revival in style, with a central tower at the east facade. And here we are looking at the east facade, and our camera is facing to the west. The church is located at the center of this USGS map and is represented by the small red dot. To the east, we see Highway 94 and the Mississippi River, just north of downtown Minneapolis. We see here a closer view of the church, which is surrounded by a red border. The church is actually part of a larger complex of buildings, including a parish center and a large residence with many units. However, only the church is being nominated to the National Register, as the remainder of the complex falls outside the period of significance. Originally, the church was a basement where Mass was held beginning in 1910. The superstructure was completed in 1911, and the church underwent a few alterations during its period of significance. The church became a physical representation of the Norwegian American community in North Minneapolis. And as noted in the nomination, quote, the vision of the St. Olaf congregation has remained constant throughout its history and includes community ministry, Sunday school, and the Lutheran faith, as it was supported by the local and ethnically Norwegian Lutheran Free Church, which was established in Minneapolis in 1897 by a group of Norwegians who supported the ideals of a free and independent congregation ruled by themselves and not by a greater governing body. And at left, we're looking at the north elevation. Our camera is facing south. And at right, we're looking at the south elevation. Our camera is facing to the northwest. Here we have a view of the hyphen that connects the rear of the church with the parish center, which was constructed in 1962. Our camera is facing south. We have had a few properties like this in the past, properties with a hyphen connecting to another building. In those instances, the National Park Service concluded that the hyphen was acceptable. Here we have a view of the nave and the chancel. Our camera is facing to the east. And then at left is a view of the nave toward the balcony. Our camera is facing west. At right is a view of the nave and chancel from the balcony. Our camera is facing northeast. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't advance the slide. So here we see at left is the view of the nave toward the balcony. And at right is the view of the nave and chancel from the balcony.
Huh. Amazing.
And here we see the original basement chancel. However, I'm not exactly certain where our view is here. I'm not exactly certain which direction we're looking here. So I apologize for that. We have two historic views of the church. The image at left dates to circa 1911, and the one at right dates to 1924. Note the remodeled rear in the right photo and the slightly remodeled front.
Huh.
Here's a 1928 photo of the church. And you can see we got new small Gothic arched windows that were installed just above the larger Gothic arched windows at either side of the main entry. Our period of significance is 1911 to 1959. The level of significance is local. The National Register criteria is A, and the areas of significance are religion, social history, and ethnic history. But we also have to address criteria consideration A here. Again, this is a religious property. The period of significance begins in 1911 with construction of the church and ends in 1959 when Norwegian was removed from the name of the church. However, I wish to ask the board if it prefers that the period of significance ends in 1962 when the parish center was erected. With the erection of the parish center, a new chapter began with the church and the congregation. So when you're discussing the property, I mean, if you could just think about that, you know, should we stick with 1959 or should we go with 1962? We must also address criteria consideration A for the property is a church. The church meets criteria consideration A because it does not derive its historic significance based on religious doctrine, but by its historical importance. St. Olaf's Norwegian Lutheran Church was a pioneer church in North Minneapolis. The North Minneapolis congregation was established in 1874, making it the first Norwegian Lutheran church in that area. By the time the current church building was constructed in 1911, St. Olaf's was well established within the community. And during its heyday, St. Olaf's Norwegian Lutheran Church was the largest Norwegian Lutheran congregation in North Minneapolis. As explained in the nomination, quote, As the community grew in population, it became a solidly working class community by the middle of the 20th century, a time when St. Olaf's Norwegian Lutheran Church truly thrived and met the needs of the community it served. The church served as a central religious, cultural, and social meeting place. For this reason, the church is eligible for listing in the National Register. And we have two pieces of correspondence for this property. In a letter dated November 10th, 2021, the Minneapolis Department of Community Planning and Economic Development, writing on behalf of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission, notes the HBC supports nomination of St. Olaf's Norwegian Lutheran Church to the National Register. The second piece of correspondence is dated November 8th, 2021, and comes from the Norwegian American Historical Association in Northfield. The association strongly supports nominating the church to the National Register. However, I should make a note here. Chair Anderson and I were talking a little bit about this. Again, Chair Anderson is really kind of an expert in this area, and she noted that there were a few mistakes in the nomination. And my hope is that we can pass this nomination pending, addressing those few mistakes that were in the nomination. So I just wanted to let all of you know that.
Thank you, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone from the audience like to make a comment or a statement about this nomination before the board discusses it? Amy, any raised hands that you see?
I am not seeing. Oh, yes, we have Kelly Wolf.
Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
Hi. I just wanted to say that this project came to us originally as a cultural resource review for a cell tower antenna that they had proposed attaching to the top of the tower. That project didn't go through, clearly, and the church was able to get a legacy grant in order to move forward with this nomination process. It's been a really good process. I want to especially thank Pastor Dale Hume, Sue Quist, his wife, and Tom and Ruth Moen for their help with this and for sharing their stories and their passion for the church with me as I worked through this nomination with Alyssa. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Other comments or statements from the audience? Or anything from the board?
Yeah, this is Board Member Schulke. This is somewhat similar to the Trinity Lutheran Church, the Gothic style in Henning. But I also applaud the authors for really trying to make sense of Norwegian Lutheranism in the United States, which can get somewhat convoluted. There were same thing happened even in Ottertail County. There were so many splits and so many divisions over the years, but I think that was basically a result of, the freedoms that they first experienced, religious freedoms, especially away from the State Church of Norway when they came to the United States. So it's complicated, but I think I applaud you for that religious, social, and cultural history because it's extremely important. And the level of ethnic cohesiveness among the Norwegians is in Minnesota is really very fascinating and interesting study.
Thanks, Board Member Schulke. And was it Board Member Stark? Someone else had their hand up. Yep, Board Member Stark, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with what Board Member Schulte just said. The telling the story or kind of finalizing, we've had a number of these Norwegian churches in different parts of Minnesota and talking about the differences between it and building across the street from one another, that type of thing. Right. But this really ties it together and brings it up to current day where they joined the ELCA. So that was Very interesting. The only comment I would add to that is ELCA is not just Norwegian Lutheran, it's a combination of a bunch of others. I have a German Lutheran background, so it's very similar. Changed the name of our church from German Lutheran to in 1959, so that must have been a big stepping point at that point on that. As far as Dennis's comment about 1962 as the end of a period of significance versus 1959, since there's really no change in the historic importance of it, I don't think just the name change would be an important issue to change that date to 1962. So I'd be in favor of 1962 when the parish hall got built. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Board Member Stark. Else? Question or comment? Seeing anyone? So jump in if I didn't see your raised hand. As Dennis mentioned, this is Board Member Anderson. We had talked about this a little bit earlier, and I also think that changing the date of the period of significance to something more significant than was, I suspect, kind of an afterthought, that they looked at the original incorporation of the congregation used St. Olaf's, for instance, and many of these congregations put German or Danish Norwegian or something in the title of the church, and they were using English. They'd used English for the dedication of this building in 1911, as a matter of fact. So it's not as though they were speaking Norwegian up to 1959, and that was a big change. My sense is that it was a kind of administrative change, and much more significant was the size of the group at that point, nearly 2,000 people, and then their physical and geographic expansion. So I think that 1962 and breaking through the back of this 1911 building would be a more meaningful point to use as the end of the period of significance. I also appreciated some parts of the story of Norwegian American Lutheranism, and I was particularly pleased to see the thoughtful description of the Lutheran Free Church, which is sometimes described as kind of a bunch of hillbillies who didn't know what was going on. And seriously, it is. I can tell you as the archivist at Augsburg University that frequently we get this kind of, there's sophisticated people and then there's the Lutheran Free Church. To put the pietism into, I think, a really appropriate context, and to use the language that the Lutheran Free Church used for itself about free and living congregations, I think was a good way of not only describing it, but also kind of setting up a realistic sort of distinction for that group among all the other Norwegian Lutheran groups. I did have a question about the balcony in the interior, and I don't know if Kelly, if you came across any helpful information about this. It's it's a sort of standard Gothic revival style church box here on the outside, but that you mentioned a curved handrail, and actually the curved handrail is curved because it goes on a curved balcony, which is much more typical of the auditorium churches, for instance, that were being built in sort of a theater style space. And I wondered if you saw any references to that or descriptions about why they put in that kind of undulating organic shape for their balcony rather than just having straight galleries or a gallery up at the back.
That's a great question, and I dug and dug and dug trying to find any sort of early plan for the architecture of this building, and I couldn't find anything that was earlier than that very last addition with the parish center. I was able to find those plans, but I think because it was constructed by individuals within the community and as kind of a smaller group effort, there's very little left about design choices and things like that. So I had to look at more generic architectural history in churches and Norwegian churches and that kind of Gothic style. So yeah, I didn't find much.
And have you seen pictures of their earlier buildings? Because often these building number 2 or number 3 is either a continuation of something that they had that they liked, or they're saying, ugh, no more of that. Now we want something like this. do you know anything about the earlier buildings and what, if this was just a bigger and brick version of what they had before, or if they were making a distinct change in 1911?
Yeah, I know that each consecutive building was larger. And I believe the earlier versions were a similar Gothic style church. There's a little bit available in their archives, but not a lot.
No pictures?
I have to dig back through the files and try to remember if there were.
Okay, thank you. I see Board Member Stark with a raised hand. Is that from before, or is it a new question?
That would be before. I can ask you a question. Dennis said you had some little changes. Are they just terminology, or is there anything that's worth sharing?
Yeah, some of it's terminology. There's some errors that need to be corrected. One of the things that kind of interested me about this is the discussion about ethnicity and, for instance, whether Norwegian and Norwegian American are interchangeable terms, or how long it's legitimate to say something is Norwegian when the immigrants had been, were long gone, and it was their children and their grandchildren who were around, many of whom had never been to Norway or didn't speak the language, or so some of making some having some clarity, especially because the period of significance that was chosen had to do with a name change that had to do with ethnicity, but trying to sort out who are the Norwegians and who are the Norwegian Americans, and when does that become its own thing, as opposed to, well, like the Lutheran Free Church, absolutely American, Norwegian American, but not Norwegian. So it just kind of sorting out and clarifying some of those issues was, I think, fairly important to this story as it's being told.
Can I add to that, Board Member James?
Go ahead, Board Member James.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And there was a couple of points, and mind you, I don't know anything about church history, but on section 8, page 36, like the 6th line from the bottom, in 1959, the St. Olaf's Norwegian Lutheran Church congregation recognized the changing demographics in North Minneapolis ahead of the race riots of the 1960s. There's a type of prescience that's suggested in that sentence that is a fascinating choice. I mean, I don't know much about that history. It initially came, at the very bottom of section 8, page 33, page 32, like the year 1959 marked the end of an ethnically Norwegian focused community. And I get that it's connected to the name change, but there's some very strong claims that are made that, it just makes me wonder a little bit, to what extent is, did the church make that, make a stand against segregation, or, I don't know. But it was just really interesting. It was interestingly worded that, gave me pause a couple of times. So, not to dispute whether 1959 and 1962, it just seems that year is so critical in the narrative. It might, telling that story carefully is important. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Board Member James, could you please send me an email with your comments about that?
Sure.
Maybe we can work that in. And also, I just want to make sure, are we comfortable? Are we comfortable with going with the 1962 date?
I concur. Board Member Schulke concurs.
Okay.
Anyone else want to chime in about the date for the ending of the period of significance?
This is Board Member Warner, and I also concur on the 1962 date.
Okay.
Board Member Koski also agrees with that.
This
Chair
is
Anderson, Oh, Dennis, I was just going to recommend that date become part of the motion, just to make sure that
Oh,
we
okay.
can do
Yeah.
the official vote on it, and then we'll know. Certainly it's great to hear board members' positions now, but I would make it part of the motion just so it's really clear.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great.
Other discussion, comments, questions? Do we have a motion to approve the nomination with the change of the period of significance from 1959 to 1962?
This is
Mr.
Board
Anderson.
Member Warner. I so move.
Thank you. And is there a second?
Board Member Dyer, I second.
Thank you, Board Member Dyer. Any other discussion?
I realize we're kind of out of the public discussion, but Kelly Wolf has their hand up.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Kelly, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask a question about 1962. When I go to revise this, will that, ending it in 1962, does that then include the Parish Center addition in the boundary, or is it just the marker of this?
Yeah, Kelly, no, it won't include it.
Okay.
Because we just don't have any, we don't really have a long period of it existing.
Right.
Okay. So we're just kind of using it as a marker right now to sort of end things. Ideally, this would have been a great property for like African American heritage. If we just didn't have that 50-year rule leaning on us right now, it would have been great to try and bring that in. And hopefully in the future, we can indeed do that. But right now, I think it's got to be sort of like the marker for the end to the period of significance. I don't think the MPS is going to pass it otherwise.
Thank you for clarifying.
Any other discussion? Okay, we'll vote. Board Member Decker,
Aye.
Board Member Dyer,
Aye.
Board Member James,
Aye.
Board Member Koski,
Aye.
Board Member Lavasser,
Aye.
Board Member Olson,
Aye.
Board Member Schulke,
Aye.
Board Member Stark,
Aye.
Board Member Warner,
Aye.
Board Member White,
Aye.
and the chair also votes aye. Thanks, everybody. And we are on to the last, the Women's Club of Minneapolis, in Minneapolis, Hennepin County. Dennis.
Okay, yes, this is the Women's Club of Minneapolis in Minneapolis, Hennepin County. The author is Amy Lucas of Landscape Research, LLC. The Women's Club of Minneapolis is located adjacent to Loring Park at 410 Oak Grove Street in Minneapolis. It is roughly a rectangular multi-story building sheathed in brick. Our view here is of the south elevation, and our camera is facing to the northeast. Regrettably, the red star that marks the site of the building is gone from this map. I'm not entirely sure why, but the building is located in the northeast part of the map where the freeway forms an L. So if you see that L up in the northeast part of the map, the building is actually tucked right into the corner of that L. Here is a closer view. The building is just south of Loring Lake and is outlined with a red border. The Women's Club of Minneapolis is significant for its social history, for its association with the National Women's Club movement that helped women make great strides in social, cultural, and civic development. The Italian Renaissance Revival building has been home to the Women's Club of Minneapolis since 1927, when the building was constructed. And at left, we're looking at another view of the south elevation. Our view there is to the north. And at right, we're looking at the north elevation. Our view there is to the southeast. Many prominent women in Minneapolis organized the Women's Club with its purpose to encourage involvement in philanthropy and education, conservation, public health, the establishment and maintenance of libraries, political reform, and additional issues. The spaces in the building are necessary for the club's programming and include a dining room, library, auditorium, and ballroom. Primarily, the point of the club was for supporting programs and achievements that empowered women and brought about cultural enlightenment and social reform. The Women's Club continues to this day. And at left, we're looking at the north and west elevations. Our camera is facing southeast. And at right is the east elevation. Our camera is facing to the west. Here we have some interior views of the Women's Club. At upper left is the lounge at the 4th floor. The view there is to the east. And bottom middle is the lobby at the 4th floor. Our camera there is facing south. And at top right, we're looking at the dining room. And there the camera is facing east. Both of these images are of the auditorium. The image at left is to the west, and that at right is to the east. At left, we have the library. Our view there is to the south. And at right is the ballroom. On the 2nd floor, the camera there is facing east. Here we have the south elevation of the Women's Club circa 1928 at left, while another view of the south elevation is at right. The photo at right dates to about 1929. Here we have two historic interior views of the Women's Club. The image at left is the lounge, and that at right is the dining room. Both photos date to circa 1928. The period of significance is 1927 to 1971. The level of significance is local. The National Register criteria is A, and the area of significance is social history. The period of significance for the building begins in 1927 when the building was constructed and continues to 1971, which acknowledges the organization's continuing mission and success. As noted in the National Register nomination, quote, the Women's Club of Minneapolis is locally significant under criterion A as the clubhouse specifically designed for the Women's Club of Minneapolis and its programming requirements. The club members focused on civic, cultural, and philanthropic activities in Minneapolis and made significant advancements in the reform movement, as well as promoting women's roles in the betterment of the community. For this reason, it is eligible for listing in the National Register. And we have one piece of correspondence dated November 9th, 2021 from the Minneapolis Department of Community Planning and Economic Development. Writing on behalf of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission, the department notes that the HBC supports nomination of the Women's Club of Minneapolis to the National Register. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Dennis. Are there any statements or comments from members of the audience tonight? Anyone here to speak about this property? Any comments?
Hi, I'm Amy Lucas. Can you all hear me?
Yes, thanks, Amy. Go ahead.
Hi, I have some snoring dogs. So I'm just here really to answer questions. The Women's Club actually received a grant to list this property years ago. And then we're in some financial straits. And so they sat back for a minute and we're not sure about listing. And then they came back to me this year. And so they did want to list the building. that they were really kind of reinvigorating the club membership, and it's partially open to the public now, so you can go and eat on the rooftop deck or in their dining room as a member of the public without being a club member. And it's getting some new furniture if you all stop in.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for being willing to answer questions if we have any. Speaking of which, anything from the board? Discussions, comments, questions?
Well, board member Schulke, I'll just mention it's interesting 1927 because that Fergus Falls Women's Club organized the Otter Tail County Historical Society under their impetus in 1927. And it certainly was a very active organization in Fergus Falls that made a lot of civic improvements, and they still have an active group today.
Thank you, Board Member Schulke. Any other comments or questions?
This is Board Member Warner. I was wondering if they happen to have any photos of some of the bedrooms that got converted, just to kind of get a sense of scale and what those rooms look like.
I have pictures of the bedrooms. I did not add them to the nomination. They're fairly small. They share a Jack and Jill. They're only on one half, so they face, and the photos that Dennis has up now, it's the, they face not the Loring Park, but the Oak Grove side. So it's the windows on that top floor. They're all offices now, or meeting rooms. You can rent a meeting room. They're called apartments, but they're really, the clubhouse still calls them apartments, but they're really just bedrooms with a shared Jack and Jill bathroom. Most of the bathrooms have been disabled at this time. They, when this building was built, all the plumbing was in the outside walls of the building, and that all had to be redone multiple times through the years, pulled out of the walls, insulated. It was kind of a design flaw, I guess, with the weather and the brick walls for the clubhouse. In the apartments, the fire department doesn't allow, for the city of Minneapolis, doesn't allow residents to still come and stay there. And that happened a few years ago with a small fire. And then the city said that they must have a manager on duty full time if people spend the night there. So they quit using those apartments, those bedrooms.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Hi, this is Board Member Stark.
Go ahead, John.
Amy, nice job on this. I'm glad to see this finally came through. I knew years ago that that grant was in existence and had not seen anything. So it's really nice to see the nomination here. There was one comment in there that criterion C was not pursued, and it sounds like it would be eligible and it's just a matter of additional research. Is that something still as a possibility in the future, or was there a reason just not to do it?
I am not pursuing that. The club members love their building. They love the women's history of the building more. There is a large addition on the parking lot side of the building, and there are some rooftop additions that are not so complimentary. I don't think that they hurt it. I think that it's got an incredible interior to this day. But to the kind of the east side of the entrance, those last two bays have been altered quite a bit with kitchens and mechanical rooms, kind of an industrial staircase, a freight elevator. So it is an addition that was slightly problematic. And so I did stay with the women's history part of the club, but I agree. It's a fabulous building and anyone can walk in, and I hope more people do. They're down to about 150 members from 2000 in its heyday.
Yeah, it is a fascinating building. It's very unique, but it does make sense to put the mission first, which I really applaud too.
Board Member Koski, you had your hand up. Do you still have a question?
This is Board Member Koski. I did have a question, but Board Member Stark beat me to the punch.
And I saw Jan had a hand raised. Jan,
Yes,
did you-
hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I just wanted to point out that the Women's Club began in 1907 and were located in several former buildings, older homes, and in 1925 or so decided they needed a bigger building and engaged the services of the architect who actually built the Fauché Tower. I can't remember his name. I don't have the history in front of me, but we did have a significant architect. And the Women's Club has been going on without stop through wars, through the Depression, through now the pandemic, when we had to really curtail activities. But it is still going strong, and we have worked very hard to maintain this building the way the founders intended, or the way the women in the 20s, cared very much. Many of the members went off to Europe to buy parts of the building, certain elements. It's really a charming building, and I encourage you all to visit when you have a chance.
Thanks, Jan. Any other comments or questions from the board? Board Member Decker.
I agree with Jan. I've been in the building. It's got a beautiful interior. I just have a question for her is, are they still having like wedding receptions and that type of thing
Yes,
get the
yes,
purse
we
strings?
are. Yes, yes, we are. It helps pay the bills of a 1928 building. And we are in the process of working to renovate the theater. The theater has been so well used in the past, how many years, 90 years, and the seats need renovating and so forth. Anyway, we have worked very hard to keep the public areas of the building very much up to date, maintained, cleaned, carpets replaced, walls painted, ceilings repaired, etc. It's really a lovely, lovely building.
It also has a great view of Loring Park as well, folks.
Yes, we had hoped this year to, you see under those arches in the picture on your right, we had hoped to open a kind of a bar, a light dinner or a light food court under that's actually would be protected from any weather. And you'd have a view of Loring Park and could sit out there under those arches. Well, we just could not get staff, as you know. The problem with hiring people this summer was very difficult, so we were never able to open it. But all summer we did have dinner on the rooftop, which you cannot see in these photos. We have a gorgeous rooftop that has fabulous views of the city.
Thank you.
Look for that next summer. And this winter we may have an ice bar on the roof. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Jim.
Any other comments, questions, discussion from the board?
This is Board Member Koski.
Go ahead.
I move that we support this nomination to the National Register.
Thank you, Board Member Koski. Is there a second?
Board Member Decker, I second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, Board Member Decker.
Aye.
Board Member Dyer.
Aye.
Board Member James. Board Member Koski.
Aye.
Board Member Lavasser.
Aye.
Board Member Olson.
Aye.
Board Member Schulke.
Aye.
Board Member Stark.
Aye.
Board Member Warner.
Aye.
Board Member White.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. So that's that. Amy, anything before we adjourn?
I have nothing, but thank you everyone for holding out. There's a lot of great discussion tonight.
Dennis, Ginny, anything that we need to add?
Actually, no, I really don't have anything,
Okay.
Thanks as always, y'all.
Can we have a
Yeah.
motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
That was, I'm sorry,
Stark. Board
Stark.
Member Stark.
Thank you very much. And hearing no objection, I think we're done for the evening. Thanks, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yeah, you too.
You too. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.